Well, hello, Sarah. I want to say that I'm really delighted to see this. It's been a long time in the making, and I wish to give you every kind of congratulation that I can. So I'd like to welcome everyone to Sarah's virtual launch. And what I'd like to do is offer just a little bit of background as to how this book came into being. Say a little bit about Sarah and then turn it over to her, and she will read a little bit from the collection. And then I have a number of questions that I'd like to ask her, and we can just sort of go with the flow. So the way that this began, the way that Handwringers began is that Sarah was doing a creative writing MA at the University of Regina. And this was her thesis project. But I'd like to say a thing about Sarah and the way that the thesis project worked. Sarah is an extraordinarily hard worker, and she is a self-confessed graphomaniac. So what would happen is that she would give me the collection, the manuscript, and I would go over it, make suggestions, do this and that, and then return it to her. And then pretty much, quick as a bunny, she would turn it around, but then she would say, I've written some new stories. And I go, okay, so I'm looking at the manuscript plus the new stories, send it back to her. She sends it back to me. I've written some new stories. This happened like 3, maybe 4 times that I've written new stories. So it was really quite exciting to see this project transform itself, but oh my gosh, it took a lot of attention to keep up with the new work. How do I describe this book? Well, I'll just say one thing. I'm an admirer of the German painter Gerhard Richter. And one of the things I like about him is that he can paint in any style. He does abstract, he does realism, he does photorealism. And Sarah is like that. She can write drop dead realist stories. It makes me wonder, how does she know so much about the human mind? How has she observed people interacting with each other so closely? How has she observed pigeons the way that she can do it? She can also do completely crazy ass experimental. She can do fables. She can do parables. She can do monologues. She can do some stuff. She can write in genres that I don't even think that we have a name for yet. I mentioned to a colleague of mine, Jess Battis, that Sarah's book had come out, and he said, I really, really admire Sarah because she's someone who loves the short story. She's not a fiction writer who's writing in short fiction because an MA thesis has to be brief. She's someone who really loves the short story. And this is absolutely true. One of the things that short story writers are very good at is creating endings that you can't expect. And I'm not talking about trick endings. I'm talking about the story lifts off and goes into a new dimension. This is Sarah. So what I'd like to do that now is turn it over to her, and you can listen and see the kind of short stories she can write.
Okay, it's very difficult to respond to that. That was so nice and kind of nostalgic because I was reminded of living in Regina and working on the MA and working with you, Mike, and it was just the best time. I have like glowing reviews of my time at the U of R. The English department was so fun and so supportive. Yeah, but that's a lot of compliments, and I'm as a shy person who I'm prone to self-deprecation. I feel a little frightened of all those compliments, but I appreciate them. So as far as reading the stories go, I just did the audio book with Zoe, actually, from the or Zoe. I always want to say Zoe because there's just
Sure.
Zoe from the English program. And it was hard. It was hard to read them because I've always seen them in words, and I didn't realize how different it was. Words that were kind of mouthed in my head and then like saying them out loud for an audience. So it was really strange. It was like they were different stories altogether. And I feel like not all of them translated the way I would have wanted them to into space. So for example, my favorite story, and the one that I thought I was going to read initially, was Camp Checamus. But it's got sort of multiple characters, and then I would have to do a voice. So I chose one for right now where I don't have to do a voice, and I also thought it kind of fit the topic, which is basically when people ask me what my thesis was about, I would say mediated Jewish identity. That was my sort of tagline, and then it was kind of easy for me to launch off from there what that actually meant. It was like I related to my television or movies or various characters. But I started reading a lot when I was doing a lot more Jewish writers, 1960s Jewish writers, and you recommended Grace Paley, who was, I don't know how to describe. She's just good. She's kind of incredible. So I wrote a story about Grace Paley, and that's the one I'll read now because it's real short, and I think that this one maybe translates to speech better than some of the others. Okay, so it goes. In the end, man will probably peel his skin. Miss Paley stood up on a park bench in her worn gray socks. Okay, when I did this thing with Zoe, I corrected myself so many times. I get nervous in the Zoom world. But okay, I'm starting again. Miss Paley stood up on a park bench and her worn gray socks fell and bunched around the holes of her shoes. She tried to climb onto the armrest, but stumbled back and settled for standing on the seat. She said, "Who's the bum who leaves the Kleenex in the halls?" And people walked quickly past. She said, "The truth finds its own level and floats." And several people stopped and gathered around her gray ankles. She told the people gathered that whether or not their lives were ruined by monkeys, snakes, and seething teenagers, or cured by durable plastics, they would remain, rain or snow or windswept pavilion, diurnal. And the few who had gathered vacated, unsettled. We, sitting across from her, having a picnic smoke and a cherry coke, took notice. We remembered forever. Yeah, so that was about Grace Paley, and that kind of I mentioned this in the notes, but I used some of her lines from the Little Disturbances of Man, which was a great short story collection. And yeah, she was okay. So on the back of the book, it described me as acrobatic, which I thought was very flattering. But I mean, Grace Paley was acrobatic. She was more acrobatic in her sentences. Like her sentences would. You have to read them twice to figure out the places she's going, where she's coming from, and where she's going. But she was neat, and that was about her. That's my story.
I wish that Paley could hear that, because you've captured what it's like to read and think about Paley, and I love the Coke, the way that you put that in there, and the socks. I mean, that is so wonderful. Well, since you were talking about Paley, I wonder if you could tell us as to whether you see yourself as writing into a certain tradition, or maybe into more than one tradition. Where do you see your work?
Well, I think when you start reading flash fiction, you first come upon Lydia Davis, who I guess she started in the 1960s, but her latest collection was only a few years ago, Can't and Won't. I might be getting dates wrong, but I'm qualifying all things I say right now with it could all be wrong. Anyway, and Lydia Davis, in one of the interviews I read with her, was basically like, I always tried to write long fiction, and I didn't like it a lot of the time. And then when I started writing these little bits, these little stories, I realized that I could do anything. So she was kind of giving herself permission to explore, to be experimental, to explore different kinds of writing. And I liked that she said that. I had trouble with her as a writer. Not that I think I don't want to talk too freely because I'll just end up being foolish and criticizing. She's amazing, but I didn't always love reading her. She tries the audience, and I know that she probably does that intentionally, but it works. So it's sometimes trying to read Lydia Davis, but she's very precise. She's obsessed with grammar, and I think she is actually a translator initially by trade. She's translated Proust. I don't know how to say that. So Lydia Davis was kind of like somebody that I thought, this is flash fiction, technically, history of flash fiction, but it's not. Flash took this turn, became sort of genreified, I guess, in recent years, and it's become sort of obsessed with the trick ending, or the like a O. Henry type ending, which is fine and cool, and I am into. But I liked how Lydia Davis wrote either experimental or literary fiction style flash, and maybe that helped me see that there was a place to just have little clips of things, little vignettes, because prior to writing the thing, I thought, I mean, you could, so currently I'm working on something longer outside of this little flash world, and it's a different feeling working on something longer, but writing the little flash pieces has its own feeling and mode and kind of satisfaction, and I really wanted to be able to explore that for the project that we worked on. And so Lydia Davis was huge. As far as other people who influenced me, I read so much like 1960s Jewish fiction, and even earlier than that. So I guess like I learned a bit about the fools, the wise men of Helm, and so Isaac Bashevis Singer, and a little Sholem Aleichem, and tried to familiarize myself with the folklore. It wasn't exhaustive, because that's like that's sort of a life worth of study that I'm dipping in and out of, just because there's so much to know in general. But I feel like I did kind of like a crash course in Jewish literature that I hadn't had before, or that I didn't know as much about. I'd always known the big guys, Philip Roth. Who else is a big guy? I actually read a lot of Woody Allen when I was younger. His short story collections from the 1960s are hilarious. And yeah, I don't remember the question. The question was, where do you see yourself in the tradition? And things I like, trying to synthesize and come up with new versions. I don't know. I could keep babbling about this, but I'm going to cut me off right there.
Well, you managed to occupy so many different voices. Your retelling of the story of Abraham and Sarah is great. I mean, it's amazing what you do. But something that I should mention is that when Sarah and I worked on the thesis that became Handwringers, there were no drawings. And so when I get my copy in the mail, or dropped off actually personally, thank you, the drawings are amazing. And I'd like to ask you about the drawings, because I see them sort of drifting through the collection, and some of them are just spot on. You read the story, you look at the drawing, and you go, oh my God, it's perfect. So I wonder if you could tell us about the drawings and how you thought about the project by including the drawings.
Okay, so I have to bring up someone's name here, and I've never met this person, but I believe it's Tanya Woke, Third Wolf Studio. I sent Deborah from Radiant Press a bunch of possible cover ideas of little things I drew that I thought might fit. And one of them was, I think, a square of like 9 little heads. Those are the little heads that are now in the book. And I had like done a little mock-up, and I thought they kind of suited it. The cover that made the cut was a bunch of random, a bunch of bulge figures, hastily drawn. But mostly it seemed like it was evocative of different voices that occupied the story. I think there's 72 stories, so the idea that there would be a bunch of different characters on the front seemed to fit. But this Tanya Woke, I might be saying that wrong because I haven't met this person, but Deborah sent my cover ideas to Tanya and I think the Third Wolf Studio people, and they actually spliced in. So they fixed up my signature and like my hand ringers scrawl and my picture, and they put on a yellow background, and then they spliced some of my other pictures into the book. And I agree, they did it in a really it's when I was going through the audiobook with Zoe, I realized that the pictures felt like they fit the stories, which I thought was very neat. I didn't pick that. I drew the pictures, but I didn't choose their placement. That was the Third Wolf Studio people. And I think that they did a good job. And I was really pleased to see it. That was kind of a surprise for me. And yeah, fun. I liked it.
Well, it's really, really cool. Oops, there we go. Since you said that they put the pictures in the manuscript and you didn't choose that, I do want to ask you a question about choices that you did make. And what I mean by this is that I know that you put together the order of the stories in a very thoughtful manner. And I wonder if you could let us know some of the thoughts that you had when you were deciding which story would be placed where in the manuscript, which story would follow the other, and so forth.
Okay, so this was kind of an extension of the thesis project. The original thesis project, I think, had 40 or 50 stories in it. And this one has 72. So I kind of tried to expand on the idea that had developed during the writing of the thesis and the ordering that had developed. And ordering was a huge issue when coming up with the thesis or the overall project. Because initially I had thought about it like a mixtape. Story would fit together with another story as though it was like a song. So something in the like rhythm or the flow of this one story would fit next to the other story just because of the rhythm of it. But I don't think I could adequately express that at the time. So I just didn't really have an idea of why I wanted them next to each other. And what I came up with at the time was that it would be words vaguely chronological in a way. So it would be like a kind of history or a kind of legacy, and then the loss of legacy through this through a girl's life or multiple people's life who were kind of a girl. It's like oh, this is becoming very convoluted, but it's like a fictional version of me. It's like I've abstracted myself and then turned myself into many different stories. So it's not a memoir because most of it is fiction, or it's all fiction, but there's, little tidbits of reality in there. But say it starts with like the Bible. So here's like our tradition, our history, our legacy. And then it goes into like my grandmother and stories that she might have, or stories that I may or may not know about her. And then it's kind of a small child. So like the birth of a young girl, and then it goes through her adolescence, and then like a middle years, reckless 20s, whatever, and then like a kind of thematically sterile 30 somethings. So that was kind of it. I guess it's simpler just to say it's a kind of chronology of a person's life, but in sort of an abstract way. But initially it was just going to be a mixtape, and I don't know. I think this seems like it works to me intuitively, but it's sort of hard to describe without a ramble. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes absolute sense. And part of that, I want to ask you too, how do you imagine yourself into so many different sensibilities if, as you just said, this is partially a kind of a memoir in fiction about you? But to give you just one example, a red cabbage in a small backyard garden believed he should have a fence. There were whispers of ungulates. I mean, that is just wonderfully hilarious. But I've known you for a while, and I've never once thought of you as a cabbage, nor have you ever expressed fear of ungulates. So, I mean, where does this come from? Could you talk about that?
Oh, these are good questions. So at some point during the writing of the additional stories for the Radiant version, which I wanted to be longer, I was going through I'm still going through it, a real fable phase, and trying to look into, I guess, it was an extension of the Jewish folklore, but just folklore in general, fable in general. I want to know more about it, and so obviously, fable operates as moral tales, and I'm trying to think. Oh, that's a hard question. Why the cabbages? I went into sort of an experimental territory around the midsection. It gets a little bit weirder, and to explain why exactly it's structured that way would be hard, and so I'll just have to blame more sort of intuitiveness and say that it was sort of an exploration of other forms of telling stories and other ways of expressing a kind of mental disposition, like what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and how I can make it into a digestible piece of something. So there's also Kafka. He wrote little fables, and that's a fun reference. He wrote weird little fables. And Daniel Carms, who was a huge sort of influence when I was writing it. I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but he wrote very bizarre little sort of flash fiction pieces with humans and animals and things like that. So the question was, how do I get myself? Yeah. Okay.
Well, would you like to read that little story about the cabbage? Or do you have another story you'd like to read?
I think the cabbage is on my list of stories that I would like to read. I think that one came together very nicely, although I have to find it. Oh, here it is. Oh, an exciting thing. I don't know if, so when I was recording the audiobook with Zoe, she was like, how are you going to say the name of this one on page 50, which is, you wrote, Mike, caw times 5 in an email. And I was like, oh, well, I have to actually like scream it out like a seagull sound. And she was like, well, I'd love to see that. Because the whole audiobook was me being like nervously monotone, and her being like, well, you could give it a little bit more emphasis here or there. And so for this one, I was like, well, yeah, a bird sound. And she said, what if we find a bird sound? And I said, that would be glorious. That would be like the highlight of the audiobook. So I think that's on the table right now. I'm hoping that she makes that happen. Okay, so in this section, what you know, you know. So this is a cabbage story. A red cabbage in a small backyard garden believed he should have a fence. There were whispers of ungulates, the things they did. The red cabbage had always known of the outside threat of the ungulate, but as he matured, a frenzy took hold. He spread the word, the thought, the fear. 3 cabbages staged a protest. They sent up a ruckus. The carrots went limp. The rutabagas rotted in their plots. Squash flowers shriveled. The garden fell into disrepair. The caretakers couldn't the situation. They lost interest and took up with other hobbies, woodwork mainly. When the larvae of the cabbage worm snuck in, Several cabbages maintained that a fence would have prevented the blight. While it seemed illogical to some, none had the means to disprove it. That year in the garden, bug-holed cabbages lived short lives, but the watermelon came in strong.
That's
So,
great.
in my mind, that's actually kind of a controversial story, but I don't know if it comes across that way.
I think it's wonderful. Well, a question that Sarah and I had spoken about in email was the idea of doing a version of the New York Times book review section where there's a author who's interviewed. And the question is, okay, you're having a dinner party. You get to invite 3 people, living or dead. Who's going to come to Sarah's dinner party?
Okay, so I spent too much time thinking about this question, and I thought it was going to be a lot easier and potentially more fun than it actually was. It became sort of dominant in my mind, and I had this wild dream about Elvis, I think, after we talked about that. So not Elvis, but I think that, I don't know if this is common, I think it probably is, but if you've ever been disappointed by someone that you accidentally idolized, like you didn't mean to idolize them, but you realized you were doing it, and then when you meet them or encounter them, you're just like, I'd rather not meet this person. So I think that the problem with picking actual people who were people whose works you love is that it's not going to go well. Either you're going to have nothing to say to them at the dinner party, or it'll be like an awkward dinner, and maybe they won't be the person you thought they were. So I'm going to go with Jesus, because I just think he's going to answer the question once and for all. Like, what do we have? What are we working with? He's the one to ask. Although earlier today I was like, why Jesus? Why not Moses? So I'm on the fence. Jesus, Moses, one of these guys that have had direct contact and can just give it to everyone straight. And then a friend of mine who died, he's coming just because I'd like to see him. And then I thought my cat, Wendy, because everyone would like her. Jesus, Moses, Devin, we would all have a good time. And that would be my 2 to 4 people that would come to the dinner party. So I don't think it's going to be a wild time, but it's going to be informative and probably emotional or something. It's going to be everybody's freaking out, crying, the cat's wandering around. Yeah.
Well, when you started speaking, I was thinking about that great story that Gloria Sawa has written about Jesus showing up in Moose Jaw. And anyway, that is really cool. Well, I think that we're sort of reaching the end of our time here. So what I'm going to do then is ask you if there's another piece that you'd like to read, or if you don't, then I guess I would just move to phase 3.
Well, I didn't totally prepare pieces to read, but this one's very small, so we can do this one. It's called, and it's in the fable world. So who ate who? And it's kind of a bunch of run-on sentences about the fox with a bushy tail and a pointed nose with a wet tip, who runs through the brush and jumps over branches fallen by trees hit by lightning and kills small things with glee. What about him? Asked the bunny with short white fur and nervous black eyes and nostrils wide open on a small twitching snout. Beware, said the large bird from a low branch with a rapacious glance and a very, very sharp beak. So
that's splendid. And it's the very, very that comes across so well. Well, Sarah, I want to say congratulations again. It's been such a joy to meet you and work with you. This is a wonderful, wonderful book. And I wish you all success with it and with your new work. And I'd like to thank anyone who listens to this. And I guess the obvious thing that you need to do is order yourself a copy. And I severely recommend you begin at the beginning and then go to the second story and then the third story, because it's very rewarding to read the stories from beginning to end. So I'll say au revoir from Regina, and best of luck to you. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. I just have so much gratitude. I don't really know how to word it properly. Just the amount of the help and support that you've given me, actually over the past few years now. So it's been like, I think since 2018-ish, since I signed up for the Regina MA program, somewhere around there, maybe even earlier. But yeah, I don't know how to word the amount of gratitude that I have. But as far as also thank you for anybody who has taken the time to watch, and Mike, and then Deborah and John at Radiant Press, and then all the people that have worked on this project. Yeah, I think that is those are thank yous. Yeah.
Take care. So long.
Thank you.